First of all, I want to say that I consider it a great honor to be invited to take part in today's program. Secondly, I speak only for myself. I don't represent any organization, and I don't want you to blame the Veterans for Peace for what I say. It may not reflect their views, but I think this is a time for plain talk, and I believe most of you will agree with me. First of all, or secondly, many thanks to the band. I was thrilled to hear that John Philip Sousa is still represented in Iowa, and so beautifully. I think I remember the trombone part of every number you've played up to now. One of the joys of my early years were being in a band, never learning to play the trombone well, but enjoying the fun of a marching band as well as a concert band. So thank you all for being here. June the 8th, 1967 may not appear to you to be an important day, but to me it ranks with December the 7th, 1941 is the correct date. In 1941, I was a college student coming down the stairs from my room in Jacksonville, Illinois, ready to head for church, believe it or not. And I heard Roosevelt's voice coming over the radio. A day that will live in infamy. I feel the same way about June the 8th, 1967. The men of the USS Liberty suffered as few Navy men have ever suffered. It was a ship without defenses. It just had a couple of machine guns. Otherwise, it had no defense whatever. During the morning hours, which were bright and sunny, a reconnaissance plane kept circling the ship, obviously to identify carefully what ship it was. In the afternoon, beginning at 2 o'clock, the assault began. Israeli fighter planes shot cannon, missiles, napalm onto the deck of the Liberty. They punched over 200 holes in the hull of the Liberty. The torpedo boats of the State of Israel bombarded the ship from sea. They tore an immense hole in the side of the ship, I believe 39 feet wide and about 30 feet high, just inches above the water line. When the captain saw that it was a hopeless situation, they had to abandon ship. They put the rubber life rafts into the water, and the Israeli ships shot the life rafts to pieces, so they had no way to gain safety. They were on the verge of being destroyed, ship and every person aboard. Then suddenly a miracle happened. One of the shipmates, named Harvardier, crawled across the open deck despite the crossfire that was underway. He picked up some wounds on the way, but he managed to clobber together a makeshift antenna and brought a wire over to the communications cabin, where they were able to get out just one SOS signal abroad. That signal was heard by the USS Saratoga, which was then steaming near Crete. The Saratoga captain launched aircraft to defend the Liberty. He then notified the fleet commander on the USS America, a commander named Admiral Geis, one or the other. And Admiral Geis radioed the information about the fighter planes to the White House to to the Situation Room. And to their astonishment, the response came back from Secretary of the Defense, Bob McNamara. McNamara said, "Get those ships back on the deck." In other words, turn the ships back, the airships back. Admiral Guy said, I hope you understand that the Liberty is under attack. They need help. And the answer from Bob McNamara was, "Get those goddamn aircraft back on the deck." Admiral Geis said, "I want to appeal that order to higher authority." And McNamara said, "Higher authority is right here, President Johnson." He handed the telephone to Johnson. Johnson said, "I don't care if the ship goes down. I'm not going to go to war with an ally over a couple of sailors." So the ships came back. There was no rescue from them. About that time, the SOS was heard in Tel Aviv, and the Israelis realized that the ruse is up. The fact of the attack was well known, and so they ordered it stopped and sent a message that it was just a case of mistaken identity, that the attack occurred. They apologized. President Johnson accepted the apology, and that was the end of it. Not quite. Johnson also issued an order. Thank you very much.
Compliments to Sam.
Is that swastika?
I think it's gin.
Well, one of the disabilities of becoming 90 years old is that you get dehydrated real easy, especially in hot weather. Johnson issued an order that all government offices, including the Navy, of course, had to scrub out any reference to the callback order. On the deck of the America, Admiral Geis said that he was troubled for fear he would be forced to remain silent about what had happened. So he called one of the shipmates from the Liberty, who had been wounded and airlifted to the deck of the USS America, and he closed the cabin door and he told this shipmate from the Liberty that he would probably be required to be silent forevermore about what happened. And he wanted this shipmate to know word for word what happened. So he recited the conversation that had just been concluded at the White House. The shipmate had been in the lower deck when the torpedo hit the side of the Liberty. The torpedo ripped a big sheet of steel out of the hull, and it coiled up with this shipmate inside the coil. But he was cooked so thoroughly, his eyes were burned shut. His eyelids were burned shut. He had to remain in the sick bay on the USS America for a few days before he could see to get up to see the Admiral. But he got there in time, got the message. Was it a case of mistaken identity? Absolutely not. No chance. During the morning hours, they had the reconnaissance flight flying low around the ship. There was hardly a cloud in the sky. It was a bright day. The American flag was fluttered briskly in the breeze all day long. The Israeli fighter aircraft shot to pieces the first American flag. And then, when that happened, they put up an even bigger flag of the United States. The attack continued for nearly 2 hours. It wasn't a mistake of identity at all. It was deliberate. President Johnson was commander-in-chief, and I dare say that he was probably the first commander-in-chief in the history of our country who saw fit to call back a rescue flight trying to help another Navy ship in distress. Admiral Geis spent the rest of his life pondering what he could possibly have done in the wake of that presidential order to help the crew on the Liberty. And he died a troubled man. This is the account of his family. I didn't know about all this until I was out of the Congress and read a book by one of the shipmates named James Ennis. He wrote a book called Assault on the Liberty. It's a terrific book if you've never read it. I was in the Navy in World War II. I was proud to wear the uniform. I was no hero, understand that. I was just one of a couple of million young men who got called into service. In my case, a volunteer, but that was because I knew I'd be drafted anyway. But I was proud to be in that battle. And I never doubted for a minute that my commander-in-chief would always defend me with everything possible if I got in trouble. And it troubled me greatly to learn about the Liberty. I felt it was something way out of the ordinary. Something terrible had to happen. And it had. And as I review recent history, it began a great difficulty with the state of Israel. Had it not been for Israel in causing the death of over 18,000 Arabs near Beirut in the last days of my service in Congress, there would have been no demand for a payback by the Arabs, and I don't think the Arabs would have any reason to try to knock down the Twin Towers. So that can be traced directly to the state of Israel. And beyond that, we got into the war in Afghanistan, also can be traced to the same bias in our foreign policy that harmed Arabs and benefited the Israelis. And then we would never have gone into Iraq except for Israel pressure. So, June the 8th, 1967 deserves to be called a day of infamy for our country. I never can turn down the shipmates of the USS Liberty. I've attended many of their conventions. When I was invited up here, I thought about my age, 90. Then I remembered that one of my friends in Jacksonville said, "You know, you don't look like you're a day older than 89. So I thought maybe I looked all right after all those years. But I always have a feeling of pride when I'm in a group where there are survivors of the USS Liberty. And I think all of us here today should have that same feeling of pride. I wish them well. I hope they live forever. And especially I hope that at long last, some brave soul in Congress will recognize their plight, their great service to the country, and the ordeal they went through. You would have no way to realize this, but in the wake of the attack, President Johnson sent Admiral Kidd to head a court of inquiry, and he came to the ships where where the veterans of the attack lay, some on cots, hospital cots, and he looked them in the eye and said, "If you dare say one word about what actually happened, you will face a fine or a prison term or something still worse." One of the veterans among the survivors, John Rankowski, told me he was on a cot when he heard Admiral Kidd make that threat. He said, "I was petrified. I was scared to death." He didn't have to explain what the word worse might mean. To me, it meant death. The Admiral is that plain about it. He was acting on the orders of the Commander-in-Chief to scrub everyone clear of any impulse to speak about the facts of the assault. And the survivors have often asked through government channels for copies of documents about the callback. There is nothing still on the public record. The survivors are the record themselves. And as a former member of Congress, it pains me greatly that Congress has never seen fit to honor properly the survivors of the USS Liberty. I hope I live long enough to see that happen. I consider this a great moment for myself to be in the presence of several of them. I wish them well. To me, they are great heroes of the U.S. Navy, but sadly, they are unsung heroes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. My personal interest goes in the Liberty goes back a ways because I was in college and I learned about the Liberty and then the Pueblo. Later on, I found myself in the same situation that Paul Findley was because I had a draft notice coming up, and I decided to enlist in the Navy, and they assigned me to the Naval Security Group. And people like myself and Terry Phillips here in the crowd ended up being CTs, although I think he had a lot more experience with the forwarding platforms than I ever did. I never even saw a ship. But we have two survivors of the Liberty. They're here today. We had an earlier event in Iowa City. We had another survivor here at that point. But I'd like to introduce Bryce Lockwood, a retired gunnery sergeant. He's part of the Marine detachment on the Liberty. And I'd like him to come up and say a few words.